All right, let's dive into one of the most chaotic, world-changing events in all of history, the French Revolution. This is a story of liberty and terror, and believe me, it completely reshaped the world we live in today.
And it really all boils down to one central, pretty dramatic question. How does a kingdom that's been around for over 800 years, a symbol of absolute power, just completely collapse in the span of a few short years? How is that even possible?
Well, the thing is, it doesn't just happen overnight. The best way to think about it is like a pressure cooker. For decades, you've got all these forces, social, economic, philosophical, all building up, just getting hotter and hotter, until, you guessed it, the whole thing is ready to blow.
Okay, so let's get into it. To really get why this explosion happened, we first have to look at the cracks in that old world. What were the specific things that brought France right to its boiling point?
So, picture French society back in 1789. They called it the Ancien Régime, or the Old Regime. It was basically split into three groups, or estates. Now get this, the first two, the clergy and the nobility, they made up just 3% of the population. And everyone else, all 97% of them, they were all just crammed into what was called the Third Estate.
And this system was, profoundly unequal. The clergy and nobility owned almost 40% of all the land and had all the political power, but, and this is the kicker, they paid almost no taxes. So think about that. The entire financial burden of the kingdom, paying for the army, the royal court, the whole shebang, it all fell on that 97% who had absolutely zero say in how the country was even run. It's like the system was practically designed to make people angry.
Okay, so the first ingredient in our pressure cooker, a massive economic crisis. The French government was completely, totally bankrupt. And you might ask why. Well, for decades, you had the monarchy spending lavishly, and even more importantly, you had the enormous cost of fighting foreign wars, including, helping to bankroll the American Revolution. And then, things got personal for everybody. A string of really bad harvests in the 1780s caused a massive grain shortage. For regular folks, this meant the price of bread, the main thing they ate every single day, just skyrocketed. We're not talking about some abstract economic problem here. This was real hunger, real desperation on the streets.
And to top it all off, you had a total vacuum of leadership. King Louis XVI was supposed to be an absolute monarch, right? But he was just indecisive, ineffective. He knew, and his advisors knew, that they had to reform the tax system. But every single time they tried to make the nobility pay their fair share, the nobles would just use their power to block it. The monarchy was literally powerless to fix its own mess.
And the final, absolutely crucial ingredient? Ideas. You had these Enlightenment thinkers, guys like Rousseau and Voltaire, and they were spreading these brand new, revolutionary concepts. Things like, maybe a government's power comes from the people, not from God. That maybe all people have rights to liberty and equality. This gave that huge Third Estate the words they needed, a new language, to talk about what was wrong, and to imagine a totally different, fairer world.
So, you've got the pressure cranked up to the max. Let's see what happens when that pressure cooker finally explodes. This is the moment it all kicks off, the storming of the Bastille and everything that came right after.
And wow, when it finally happened, it happened fast. Breathtakingly fast. Just look at 1789. In May, the king is finally forced to call a meeting of the Estates General. By July 14th, a mob in Paris storms the Bastille prison, this huge symbol of tyranny. Just a month later, in August, you get the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And by October, it's clear the people in the streets are the ones in charge now.
And here's the absolute core of it, this radical new idea at the very heart of the revolution. Just let these words sink in. All men are born and remain free and equal in rights. That one sentence just completely wiped away centuries of tradition, of privilege, of being born into your station in life. This was the start of a whole new age.
And this shows you it wasn't just some abstract revolution of ideas. No, this was driven by ordinary people. Take the Women's March on Versailles. We're talking about thousands of working women, furious about the price of bread, who marched 12 miles straight to the king's palace. They stormed it, and they physically forced the royal family to pack up and move to Paris. It was just a stunning, undeniable show of people power.
But that early hope of 1789?
It didn't last. It pretty quickly gave way to paranoia, to fear, to violence. The revolution was about to enter its most radical and bloody phase, a time when, as they say, the revolution began to devour its own children.
So, the radical faction that seized power, the Jacobins, they had this huge dilemma.
On the one hand, their goal was, pretty noble. Create a perfect republic of virtue, all based on reason and equality. But on the other hand, their method for getting to that utopia was just brutal. State-sanctioned terror against anyone they decided was an enemy of the revolution.
And they had a truly chilling way of justifying it. Just listen to their leader, a guy named Maximilien Robespierre. He actually argued that, quote, terror is nothing else than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. So in his mind, the guillotine wasn't murder. No, it was a necessary, even virtuous tool to purify the nation and save the revolution from all its enemies, inside and out.
And the result of that way of thinking? Well, it was the reign of terror. And the human cost was just staggering. We're talking over 17,000 people officially executed by the government, many of them after trials that were a complete joke. This was the dark, dark side of that quest for a perfect republic.
A state that's built on terror just can't last. The revolution's endgame really played out in 3 steps. First, that paranoia turned on itself, and Robespierre himself ended up at the guillotine. That led to a new government called the Directory, but it was corrupt and weak and couldn't bring any stability. And finally, into that total chaos, that power vacuum, steps a brilliant and incredibly ambitious general. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seizes power, and just like that, the French Revolution is over. And the great irony? They replaced a king with an emperor. But here's the thing. Even though the revolution itself was over, its ideas, they were just getting started. So let's talk about its lasting echo and really explore why this thing that happened over 200 years ago still matters so much to us today.
I think the revolution's most famous legacy has to be its motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. Liberty, equality, brotherhood. That simple phrase became the core belief for modern politics. It inspired democratic movements and revolutions all over the world.
But we have to stop and ask a really critical question here. When those revolutionaries wrote all men are born equal, who were they really talking about? Who did that incredible promise of liberty and equality actually apply to?
Because if you look closely, the revolution was just full of these deep contradictions. There was an activist, Olympe de Gouges, who wrote a declaration of the rights of woman demanding equal rights, and they executed her for it. The call for liberty inspired a huge slave revolt in the French colony of Haiti, but later, Napoleon tried to bring slavery back. And his famous legal code, the Napoleonic Code, it gave legal equality to men, but it actually stripped away rights from women that they'd only just begun to taste.
And yet, for all its failures, for all its hypocrisies, its impact is just undeniable. It completely destroyed the old feudal system in France. It created the blueprint for modern politics, things like liberalism and nationalism. And maybe more than anything, it unleashed this radical idea of universal human rights. The idea that these rights don't belong to a king or a class, they belong to everyone, everywhere.
Which leaves us with one last, really tough question, one that historians are still arguing about today. The French Revolution gave us the language of human rights and democracy, but it also gave us the blueprint for modern, state-sponsored terror. It was the messy, violent, contradictory birth of the modern age. So you have to ask, was it worth the price?